All right. This is a moment I've been waiting for, announcing the classical series. Well, really, it's ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient Judea, and a little bit, sometimes some ancient China, ancient India, ancient Persia as well, Mesoamerica, whatever. But the foremost concern is the Roman Republic transitioning to the Roman Empire, the Principate, of course, and I think the most tragic moment in all of that is the downfall of the late Republic. Of course, we won't get into that in this video in particular. This video is more about the first several emperors, first batch. I just did a U.S. presidents tier ranking, and I realized that so many of those presidents need to be clumped into small groups because they really are. There's different kind of eras of president, different sort of typology of president or prototype for president, for a president, and the same is kind of true of these Roman emperors, although I'm going to give it more leeway because the biographical minutia is a lot more juicy with these guys than it was with the pretty boring American presidents. And keep in mind, a lot of these guys rule for decades, whereas the presidents never rule for decades, never rule, really. Can only occasionally for more than a decade. FDR being the singular example of that. So anyway, let's start with these marble busts. Keep in mind, these marble busts were colored in, for the most part, and the pigment has eroded with abrasion from the sands of time. So you're only getting these sort of pale imitations, pale copies, right? Let's see if I can find Augustus. Is that Augustus? It looks kind of like Augustus. I think that's... If that's not Augustus, I don't know who is. It's got to be Augustus, right? Or maybe that's Vespasian. I think that's Vespasian. So I'm going to go with this for Augustus. Okay. Augustus is the first Roman emperor. Augustus effectively stole power from all the other power brokers of the time. The Senate couldn't stand in the way. He was not an exceptionally popular individual, but he was popular enough for him to override the Senate and the armies and take control. I wouldn't say that everyone was happy to have a guy running Rome like a dictatorship, but it was better to him than, say, Marcus Lepidus running, or say Mark Antony running, or say Brutus or Cassius, right? Like the conspirators and murderers of Julius Caesar. Octavius was the grandnephew of, or what, the great nephew? I don't know, whatever. Great nephew, grandnephew, whatever. Yeah, grandnephew. Right. The grandnephew of Julius Caesar, but he was adopted. I think. So it's already kind of dicey, but he was adopted because he was as a son, I guess. All right, how does it work? Anyway, he was adopted, and he inherited all Julius Caesar's wealth and estates. So when Caesar was stabbed, dozens of times by like 30 conspirators at the foot of at the temple of at the theater of Pompey or whatever. This guy inherited all of it, and then he had to vie with Marcus Antonius or Mark Antony for control of the empire because he was the second most powerful, depending on who you asked. And he actually, as emperor, though, he did win the war against Mark Antony, and as emperor, I would say I would say as emperor, he was great because he enforced a ton of new policies. He commissioned so many works, literary, like Aeneid by Virgil, or he fought some wars that were on the borders that were moderately effective. He really consolidated the empire, or the late republic, or whatever you want to call it. He was able to stabilize the economy in many cases, and he updated the legal code substantially. Also, the architecture of Rome was like redefined by Augustus's patronage. If you go to Rome now, many of the buildings that are under examination or excavation, they are buildings just erected by Augustus's wealth. Sometimes it's his own personal wealth. Sometimes it was the city's money, but he got it done. And I don't think he was as charismatic as he could have been in terms of his character. I don't think he was as shrewd a military leader as he could have been. I think he was kind of a behind the scenes type of dude in a lot of ways, a lot of backroom deals, very sort of face concerned but duplicitous. I would say he was two-faced. But he wasn't repressive to the citizens of Rome or the slaves or the the federati non-citizens or whatever. He wasn't repressive to them in a really grueling kind of way. He was just strict. Like he outlawed adultery and made that a punishable offense under his new penal code or whatever. And that's kind of creepy, but it wasn't as bad as like just murdering Christians left and right, like say like Nero would have done at one point or another. So I would say he's a great emperor. He was the first emperor and he kind of coined the term indirectly, because imperator meant ruler or someone who ascribed power, and he was the emperor. He was that he had imperium for indefinitely, so he would just be called the imperator, and eventually that just became the name of the guy with all the power, was the imperator, hence emperor. Really, it had a more humble origin, like most political words for chieftains and things like that, clan leaders and stuff, usually have very humble origins. Like the word president means the one who presides. Imperator just meant the one who had power. It doesn't mean that he's going to, he's Darth Sidious, conquering the whole galaxy. It just means that he has power in this particular moment over everyone else in a particular area. Anyway, so he was the great emperor. His reign was is one of the most studied emperors for sure, because he's the first one of the most pivotal figures in human history, really. It's hard to really pin him down as a good guy or a bad guy. It's just so complex. But I think the world benefited from him more so than with the others. But again, it's like George Washington. Like with George Washington, the difference between someone like Augustus and George Washington, the main difference is that Augustus really wanted power. George Washington accepted power because he was so popular, and then he just sort of did his time and left as president. But Augustus legitimately wanted to control everything. He was a control freak. So a guy like Augustus, everything that happens is because of his say. Whereas George Washington, as a president, was just kind of a guy that was like a shoo-in in a way. He was a guy that was a safe bet for the first president. Augustus wasn't a safe bet for anything. He was a guy who wanted to run the world and went as far as he could with it. So totally different mentalities. So I think you can call him great because he set out for what he wanted to do, invented a certain concept of rule, and strove with it, or he was really strident, or I don't know. He got it done. He was effective at accomplishing his own goals. George Washington, it's kind of up in the air whether or not he even wanted to be president that much, whether or not it even was consequential to the American Republic's stability. Of course, in an entirely different office, so inherently there's going to be a chasm of difference. But I still think, indubitably, Augustus was a superior political thinker and leader. Anyway, up next, where is Tiberius? Apparently, I have his birthday. I think this is Tiberius. Tiberius does not look a lot like Augustus, but he does a little bit. I think Tiberius was the real son, or he was adopted. I can't remember. This adoption stuff is the one thing that's just like, it's like mathematical, and I feel like I'm combining, linear algebra sort of stuff, like vectors and things, and thinking about all the tree charts, and it's sort of inconsequential to the discussion of this stuff. But Tiberius, how was Tiberius, the second emperor of Rome? So this is the thing about Tiberius, is he was an effective politician and governor and military leader, actually, in his earlier life. Like when his 30s, he was an effective dude, and then in his 40s, he was also an effective sort of politician, all around, sort of kind of factotum of the upper echelon of Roman society. He kind of can do anything, but he was assigned to be the heir to the Roman Empire, the seat of he was assigned to be Augustus's heir and inherit the Roman Empire. And it didn't. He was a middle-aged man at this point. It didn't seem like he would really want to do it that much. It seemed like he had some very obvious reluctance. And anyway, he accepted, and he was like in his early 50s or something, like not late 40s. I think he was like 50 years old, maybe around there, give or take a few years. And he didn't have that much energy for it. But when he started out, he was pretty good, because it was just another office at first, and he felt like it was just something, he probably thought it was, empowering and cool. But he was a little bureaucratic in his mindset. He kind of would overthink his jobs a lot, and I think that he liked that part of being a whatever he calls it in government in Rome. He liked to those jobs where he overthink things. The problem is that once he was emperor, he had to be more decisive, and he kind of realized that eventually, but it ended up with him just sort of being more brutal than Augustus would have been. Tiberius, like, he didn't have a middle path. He kind of was like either really nerdy or he was really like kind of aggressive. And so he would sort of vacillate. This is my interpretation. He would sort of vacillate between, placating the Senate and being really cheesy and sort of like sucking up to the Senate, even though they didn't really have power over him. He would sort of play the role of like, the companion or president to the Senate. He would act like he wasn't superior to them. He would like play equal. He would pretend to be equal. But then at the same time, he would, like, if a political opponent threatens him, he would have them murdered. So he would go in and out of being really like obsequious to, like, his rivals, like in a public sense. But then in a private sense, he would get more and more pissed off and strident and more vituperative and sneaky, and eventually people became really scared of Tiberius over the years of his rule, because he ended up being kind of a guy that you didn't know what he'd do. He seemed rather two-faced, I guess, or inconsistent. And he spent a lot of time retiring to his mansion in the island of Capri, off the coast of Napoli, and the Amalfi Coast, right? And he lived there, and he had like a pedophilia kind of thing going on with like the so-called nymphs. They were swimming in the pools that he had on like the top of the palace, overlooking the whole ocean, and it was really kind of nasty. And he was ostensibly just there to hide from Sejanus or someone who political manipulators who threatened his livelihood. Those people were in Rome still, and he was avoiding them, and then he would dispatch orders to assassinate people on occasion. Now, I make this sound like it's a whole mess, but the fact of the matter is that he was very guarded and sophisticated about how he would do this kind of thing. He was had a little more dignity than later emperors when it came to sort of ill will. Later emperors would just flat out, unabashedly murder someone, hide it slightly, and then just sort of move on to the next, item of the day. But Tiberius, his character seems to suggest that he had some concern about just murdering people left and right. But that doesn't mean he was above doing it. It just meant that he was, truculent about it. So I think Tiberius is kind of an average emperor. I think sometimes his military efforts were really astonishingly good, and then at other times he was a profligate, wastrel kind of guy. And when he died, they believe he was murdered by Caligula, his successor, his named successor. And he was murdered. He was like smothered by a pillow or something. And he was an older man at that point, so he was very easy to kill. One of the stories was that he was at a banquet, and then he retired from the banquet because he was kind of sick or wheezing or something. And then once he was alone, Caligula just strangled him and ordered everyone to leave and just strangled him with a pillow, smothered, And Tiberius had a sort of weird, like, averageness to him. I think he's a very average emperor. And the only thing that makes him seem a little bit less average is that he reigned for quite some time. He had a very long reign, which is impressive considering how kind of dicey he was. A lot of emperors like that would have been murdered by the Praetorian Guard or murdered by a rival. But in Tiberius's case, he was the immediate heir to Augustus. It was all still kind of up in the air and experimental. He was the second emperor of Rome at that point. No one really knew who he was supposed to be. He just had inherited so much power, wealth, influence. He had inherited all this stuff, and he was a competent person. I don't want to disparage him too much. He was a smart person. When he wanted to do something, he could usually get it done. But what he wanted to do was usually sort of vainglorious and evil. But he was always impressive in its scope. So he's a very mixed bag type of personality, but you can't really say he was a great emperor, can you? So I give him an average. He was a very conflicted personality. Up next is Caligula. Caligula. Caligula actually has a really kind of normal looking face. Where is his bust? There's got to be a different one. Okay. He has a really plain, sort of boyish face. It's kind of eerie. I think it's this one. I mean, Tiberius, it looks a little bit more of like a personality. Like if you look at Tiberius, look at Caligula, the difference is like pretty minute. But Tiberius looks like he's a little more of a storyteller. Caligula looks like he's more of he just kind of stares at you in silence. So there's some minor difference there. So Caligula is the third Roman emperor, and you're going to think, wow, first is the worst, second is the best, third is the one with the treasure chest. And if you think a treasure chest is, trying to marry your sister and kill everyone who disagree with you and then make your horse a senator, then yeah, Caligula gets the treasure chest. But if you don't think that, then that whole mnemonic doesn't work here. Caligula was one of the worst Roman emperors. Caligula was not in a sensible human being. Caligula was actually intelligent. Like when he first became emperor, for like several months, everyone was optimistic for the most part. They thought he was young and he seemed like he had a sense of duty and he was sort of smart. He seemed kind of like regular kind of type of guy. But then things went south and he would have weird acting. He was obsessed with being an actor, and he thought and he wanted to be the best actor, and so he'd have all these self-indulgent displays where he'd be act in front of the people of Rome or in front of the Senate, and they all just thought he was kind of insane. And of course, you'd see this later on with Nero, where Nero is a singer, and he does the same thing with singing. But Caligula, he fucks left and right, and he fucks the wrong people. I think he's bisexual, and he kills people who on like the slightest disagreement, kind of like a Joseph Stalin circumstance. People are scared of him immediately. He visits the Senate, and unlike Tiberius was very cordial with the senators, trying to sort of placate them, appease them, as it were. Caligula thinks that they're all like disgusting old men and they're irrelevant, and he insults them, and he jokes about making his horse a senator, or he even tries to do it just to mock them as a prank or something. And immediately the rumor gets out that he's just a deranged lunatic, and eventually he's murdered by for stealing all members. He just kind of start killing like didn't like he didn't like you, he just tried to kill you. And he tried to make himself that was one thing but his personality, he tried to make himself for no reason, just he didn't want for he's working as a god. But in ancient Rome, you can't just make yourself a god, you have to earn it. In a weird way. And he didn't earn it, he was popular. So he just sort of decided like Augustus, who kind of himself god, or Caesar his godfather was a god, because those guys were really popular, or at least in certain factions. But he was not essentially a popular person in the United States. And so when he puts himself deity, he's being a tyrant who wants people to enslave everyone around him. And so he's killed because he was seen more than legitimate. By basically everyone who had any interaction and not even more interaction. Because anybody on YouTube, get your Chinese prison break your face and laugh at you. And you let out for all front of you, and start breathing with it. And he was kind of like Saddam Hussein's son. The guy driving around with nice car models and everyone that he was trying to hurt people basically. For like the blood sport killjoy. It's like that. So Caligula gets terrible. Already the third emperor of Rome is dog shit. And it was right to think now that the Roman emperor system is really as cracked up as what is the cracked up to be. It's not what it's chalked up to be. I mean, who's next? Claudius. Or what's this place? Something like Claudius. Augustus. keep in mind, Caligula was not supposed to be in the air. Tiberius was Germanicus. Was certainly a general and had multiple temperaments. Was a respected person by his peers and by the populace. Well, but Germanicus died at 40 years old or something. Like he started dying in Italy, and it's his son. Same thing. Or his nephew. Anyway, so Germanicus, it is kind of a question. Now he died in free event. He had that. He was killed or something. And he was murdered. Poisoned. And so Caligula comes to the default. Not to be fair to the Roman Republic, he wasn't like for choice for letters. So yeah, I did wrong for it, but he was the best of Claudius. Okay, Claudius. Claudius is pretty interesting. Obviously, he's more intriguing than Caligula is. This is plus for the original. Where's one of his Augustus? Yeah, they don't have an obvious best. Which is the one I kind of recommend. I mean, he's very plain. Augustus. That's Tiberius. I got that one right. Yeah, and this. Oh, by the way, this is the mausoleum of Augustus, and I believe other emperors were buried there. And you can still see that standing more or less in Rome. Yeah, I mean, obviously the coins are kind of interesting. If you want you want a leg up on this history, learn about the different coins. And it's a pretty dry topic, but if you're into metallurgy, it makes it more interesting. Okay. You can collect the Roman coins still. They're all over the market now, but the problem is that they're not inherently an interesting item. I mean, a piece of coin is just like, it just gets stored away. It's not like money now where you keep in your wallet all the damn time. Money back then was often like stored, or it was just spent really quickly. Walking around with like a wallet, the way we walk around like with money. I mean, think about it. It's like a $20 bill, let's say, having like or like a $50 bill. Having that, how long is that going to stay in your wallet for? I don't know. Maybe depending on who you are, it could be there for months. But for most people will spend it basically as soon as they can get it in one way or another. So, yeah, I don't know. I can't find the image for the bust for Augustus, but I will just move the fake one and use this for Claudius. So Claudius is one of the better emperors now, the fourth emperor of Rome. He's famous for really his singular accomplishment was that he kind of conquered Britain, finally. Julius Caesar invaded Britain and then ran away because it would terrify his army. Caligula tried to invade Britain, but his army was about to mutiny against him. And so he pretended to do it, and when he went back to Rome, he ordered some of his soldiers to pretend to be slaves and run around in like shackles and stuff, just so that the populace thought he accomplished something. But he never actually went to Britain. And there's also a story that when Caligula tried to invade Britain, he went to war against the sea and started throwing rocks and shooting arrows at like the water. But that may or may not be a fabrication. There is some contention about Caligula's sanity. Some people believe that he was just like a kind of boring sociopath type dude. He wasn't actually delusional, like he wasn't like hallucinogenically crazy. But other people believe that he really was like this animated sort of maniac that believed that the ocean was Poseidon and he had to fight it with his swords and defend with his shields and throw spears at it and stuff. God forbid if he ever used a catapult against the ocean. Who knows how history would have changed. But anyway, so Caligula was just murdered. He's not really that intriguing to me in a way, because in many respects he's not intriguing to me because he didn't accomplish a lot, and his personality was pretty obvious. He wasn't a guy who hid his personality very easily. Whereas Claudius is exactly the opposite. Claudius is a master at hiding who he was. Claudius pretended to be mentally retarded while Caligula was emperor. And he, by the way, he was the uncle of Caligula. And he pretended to be retarded so that Caligula never bothered to murder him. Then when Caligula gets murdered, they find Claudius hanging out in like the villa, like hiding in some room. The Praetorian Guard does, I believe. And they just make him emperor because he's like the next in line randomly, even though that he was considered to be mentally deficient. Turns out he wasn't mentally deficient. He did have a stammer, but he was actually like a scholar. He was like a historian type of guy. He was very educated. He was probably one of the smartest people in Rome, really, in terms of literacy. I mean, we could pick that apart, but I think for a historian, he was a historical minded person, far more than most nobility could be, and because he had so much money and resources to be able to pursue that, the leisure, right? And so when he becomes emperor, he has a lot of power and he's able to focus the imperial armies, the legions, in ways that are effective. They conquer Britain. Only problem is that people still think he's kind of this crippled, retarded guy because he doesn't look that healthy. He's kind of older now, and I think he's had several wives, and they all kind of thought he had weak character or something, and maybe he had like a small dick or something. Who knows? Like, who knows what the story was? But his wives he had many wives throughout his life, and they tended to not really respect him a lot, and some cases were way worse than others. Messalina is the famous one where she was considered the biggest whore in all of Rome. And she would, while she was married to him, while he was emperor, she would challenge like the biggest whore in the brothels or district of Rome to like a whore off, and how many people she could fuck. And the best whore in Rome, lost to the wife of the emperor, the empress. The biggest whore in Rome, lost to the empress because the empress was that much of a promiscuous, coos. Anyway, just very sleazy character here. And Claudius, probably was beyond capability to even control these things, because his whole life he had been perceived as just some lame cripple, right? So he expected women to sort of betray him. He expected his character to be countermanded by the women in his life. And Claudius, I believe, there's this idea that when Nero comes around, Nero's mother, Agrippina, so Claudius eventually remarries Agrippina, and there's this rumor that she kind of rearranged his household so that everyone was on her side and no one else's side, and that meant that Claudius's natural son, Britannicus, would not really be favored. I mean, I guess there's no subtle way to say this. His natural son would basically be at risk of being poisoned by the household staff. And there's a lot of cause to believe that Claudius, and it's even written that this happened, although you have to catch a shadow. There's believed that Claudius was poisoned by his household staff, and so was Candace, because this is Netflix. And then the only pair left, as for the only possible pair left, would be with Nero, Agrippina's prior son, the prior marriage, her husband. And Nero was sort of arranged to be the emperor, not too different from Caligula, honestly. And he ends up being sort of part of Caligula. The only difference with Nero is that he was telling him, don't be like Caligula, Caligula was a bad emperor. Right? He remembered that his whole life. So as Nero ascends to the throne, he's trying to not make the same mistakes. But on some level, it feels like he admired Caligula. He ends up making the mistake. And he ends up hiring the best singers in the empire to accompany him. And he has to, I mean, he's actually the best in the empire. But he finds and accompany him and teach him how to sing. And he never really got really good at singing. But his personal character has his ranges. This voice, self expression, all that. The depth of his voice, the soundiness. And so, yeah, that kind of weak singing. And it would be fine. Because he made everyone listen to where he could before people to basically go to the arenas in the city and anywhere and would for people to stay in things to sing for hours. There's some big stories about women giving birth in the arena because they could not be jumping off the side of the arena and dying, crashing into the dirt because they were so bored. It's just terrible. Musical capability. Anyway, that's what you fabricated, but there's the girls there. They probably got so got more tears or whatever. They got some laughing. They maybe guard the shit. Other things probably did happen. And Nero was really got the money. People knew it was money. But like he was ambitious in a sense. So Nero think he would take it upon himself to, create a large racetrack or something. So they would build giant buildings. Just remember, they built like huge buildings in his honor. Built statues, so you build like temples or entertainment complexes. But Nero would try to do stuff. They would fight fire. And Nero, and he when he the things that he played violent or burned. And that was like the story of the Christians, because at this time Christianity was growing underground. Religion was persecuted, but it existed in secrecy. And it is like the overpopulation, Antichrist will try to control the Christian world and ruin it. And it was believed that Nero, a lot of people at the time believed Nero was like the Antichrist. Revolution. That's right. But the matter is, we know that Nero was violent. The violence exists. But the liar, anything. But the liar is not like an instrument that is as dramatic as the violence for the pronouns. So, Phil Hamer used the liars as interesting. It's a sense. At the same time, you might not hear it. We're going to read it. Notice playing it. The first bars. The record, as it stands, that he actually tried to help the fire. He had not made the fire. Probably they think he saw the sources that he disrupted that a lot of elements of this giant fire that was mostly is just explain, the dramatic. I think the thing Nero to keep in mind is that Nero was the thing to keep in mind Nero is that he really was trying to do the best actor he could be. But he was set up his mom. He was kind of he was loosely he was very loosely part of the whole Julio-Claudian family. They call the Julio-Claudian dynasty because the Julius Caesar and then you have Claudius, and Nero is like considered the last person in that family to rule as emperor. Because as we'll find out, Nero was also killed by the Praetorian Guard, I believe, or he was. Let me look this up. I want to see about this the naval battles in the Colosseum. The Colosseum, by the way, hadn't been built yet, so it's unlikely that the naval battles would have happened in any kind of arena at this point. But I want to see Praetorian Guard, Jewish-Roman War under Nero. Yeah, the Jews didn't really like Nero either. He planned some golden house. Some people did like Nero, by the way. A lot of people did like him, I should mention, because they just didn't interact with him enough to understand that he was kind of an idiot. And so let's give some credit where it's due. Like the common Romans probably thought he was like worthy of some sort of kind of fringe mission for them. Anyway, like a QAnon. He's like a little like Donald Trump or something. Anyway, like he probably had a QAnon faction going for him between the lines. He also really did try to be like an artist and a poet. I mean, he had a lot of genuine interests. He just wasn't convincing with them. He didn't really have a work ethic. Yeah, I'm trying to just see how he died. That's the only reason I'm looking at this, because I don't know if he was killed by the Praetorian Guard or if he was Oh, okay. He was condemned to death in absentia. He fled Rome and he committed suicide. All right, that's right. Okay, so yeah, he was spared being murdered by the Praetorian Guard, which is kind of cute. And then Galba takes over. And Galba is not part of the dynasty. He is not part of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So we're having a schism already between the original dynasty and whatever the successor dynasty may turn out to be. Okay, let me find Nero's bust. I think this was Nero, or like Caracalla or someone. I think it's Nero. I know he has like this neck beard. One of the worst emperors has like a neck beard, and so it has to be Nero. Compared to Caligula, I would give him bad. I think Caligula was worse. I think Caligula really would go around and actively, maliciously, he was like a serial killer. That's my presupposition, based on kind of the scant historical record that we have, is that he was kind of a serial killer, masquerading as a politician. Nero, to me, is more of like a retarded. He's like I don't know. He's like a developmentally disabled person that no one likes. He's unpleasant. But he's like somewhat well intentioned. So I would say he's a mark above Caligula. I think Nero just couldn't tell how lame he. I think the difference between Caligula and Nero, Caligula knew he sucked, but he hated the people. He hated the other people would indicate it to him. Whereas Nero, I think Nero might have just not known that he was bad at his job. I think he might have just been kind of a dumbass, like a moron, you know? So I have somewhat more sympathy for Nero. But then again, you know. Anyway, so by the way, I didn't rank Claudius. Not that anyone cares, but I would say he's good. I think the problem with Claudius is that he didn't have the longest reign. Like let's look at how Nero's reign was. How long was his reign? Yeah, he reigned for like 14 years. How long did Claudius reign? Yeah, Claudius reigned from. Yeah, right. Yeah, so Claudius, yeah, despite personage, he just wasn't not the one. Now we get compared to the next guy, Claudius, does seem really odd. This next guy is very well intentioned and is acceptable as a governor and senator. But he's not anywhere in the same strike as last week. Even though included love and Nero received more laurels glory than the next guy. Galba is behind the plot to eliminate Nero because he is a holdover from the good old days when Tiberius was the emperor. You know, speaking this like Galba's in the 70s. And he was the oldest older from Augustus. And as a kid, and Augustus says him allegedly, you know, you Galba will control some of the glory. And I prayed for myself. And of course, Galba was nominated elect emperor by I believe it's hard to prove this too. So let me look at Galba. So Galba, yeah, from here, and yeah, he was part of the performing part. Right. Okay. Who said that? He's a bus. He's old man. That was here. Make alternative for how is this one? I'm just assuming this is old. Anyway, so Galba was a 1 year. His new last says it was about trade. You emperor. This old man, Joe Biden, Trump's one. Old man. Not a touch. He was just like he was beyond. He was more out in terms of his utility to like a young society that was military capable. And Galba there's not lots to know about Galba. In June, he ruled. Suetonius writes about him a little bit, a few paragraphs. Everyone kind of Suetonius says more than a few things about him, but that's kind of all we know about Galba. Is from scant sources, and I think he was basically betrayed by a rival faction within the Senate and the aristocracy that they kind of promoted Otho as a sort of a rival emperor, a co-emperor, a rival emperor, a counter-emperor, or whatever. Now I have to find what Otho fucking looks like. Okay, this is weird. This one does not look real at all. This is a recreation for sure. See, Otho is a guy that probably wouldn't even have a surviving bust. This, I think, is this him? He's one of the fat ones. I'll just assume it's this one. Anyway, so Otho while he wasn't as experienced as Galba, Otho was quite a bit younger. He was like around 40 years old, and he had some popularity in Nero's circle. Nero wanted to marry this woman named Poppaea, but he had his own wife to deal with. He couldn't just divorce her. So he ordered that his friend Otho marry Poppaea to forestall, just to keep her like under lock and key, basically. And then I think he had his wife. The marriage was like disintegrated. I don't know if he killed her or not. I honestly don't remember. But she became irrelevant, and he was able to marry Poppaea, but unfortunately, Otho didn't want to give her up. So Otho, they kind of had a falling out over that, and then I don't remember the whole Otho didn't get killed, obviously, and Otho was seen as sort of an effective kind of weasel. He could kind of weave his way around the court, the imperial court. So I understand why Galba was seen as a crusty old man, a curmudgeon, and Otho was seen as like a worthy contender. And so Otho was part of a conspiracy against Galba. That really, it's just a naked power grab, and they kill Galba. They mutiny. The army mutinies against him. And it's all orchestrated though. And then Otho becomes the emperor, and it's like whatever. He's the emperor now. And it's all based on the fact that Otho had more like clout. He was more in his prime. But the fact is that Otho was not that accomplished of a guy. He was just he was a very like a chameleon. He was a social butterfly, socialite, whatever. He was kind of a hollow person. But the only twist that was actually Otho was actually not the worst human being. Like he wasn't like evil. He just wasn't a very he wasn't like a good general or like a favored politician or something. But he wasn't like downright evil either. And we'll see that this comes to blows when a sort of a colleague of Galba wants revenge over Galba's murder, and he doesn't like that Otho is now emperor. And this guy's name was Vitellius. And Vitellius is kind of like this fat dude that is like a degenerate, and he likes to gamble, and he likes to play race horses in a chariot, plays dice. He's sort of like a man about town. He's relatively popular, but he's not like a very like secure person for emperor. He's pretty degenerated and basically kind of a corrupt figure already. But he has enough passion in him to say, I don't like that Galba was fucking murdered so that Otho could just be the fucking emperor. Who the fuck is Otho? I'm better than Otho. And he actually raises an army, and it has enough influence to do this. So, and he challenges Otho on the field battle, and Otho's army fails. I don't know the specifics of that battle. I actually don't even know if that battle was recorded much. But Otho's army does not succeed, and Otho, rather than retreating and trying to spawn a civil war or a plead for more whatever this plead for support, he just kills himself. He kills himself because he understands that it would be, he has this sort of conviction that it would be damage to the Republic and cause him dishonor for him to persist in trying to sustain a civil war against Vitellius. And this is all very like cute because Vitellius is not someone that like is not someone that you would think Otho would be super afraid of, But Otho is just kind of a huge coward, I guess. So Otho kills himself, and Vitellius is now emperor. And this is all taking place over like a year. It's like these three guys, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, they haven't been emperor for long. And then now that Vitellius is emperor, immediately people are like, this guy is a degenerate. Let's orchestrate a way to remove him. Why is he emperor? He is not worthy. He is not legitimate. And of course, I think it's Vespasian who ends up killing him. I don't understand exactly. I haven't looked it up. I don't understand exactly what the circumstance behind his assassination was. I guess the military did not like him, which is always that's a pretty bad sign in ancient Rome, right? And Vespasian was a really respected commander that sort of was on the outskirts of politics. So you can see how the decline from the Julio Claudians down to Vespasian's league, where he's really just like this sort of plucky commander guy that has to like take over the whole city now. And Vespasian basically is his men sort of kill Galba, Vitellius. I think they throw him into the Tiber River. Let me look that up. Let me verify. His death. He was tall. He had a face, according to Suetonius, he was tall. He had a face usually flushed from hard drinking, a huge belly, and the thigh crippled for being struck once by a 4-horse chariot. Yeah, his body was thrown into the Tiber. And then Cassius Dio says that he was beheaded and his head was paraded around Rome, and his wife and his brother and son were also killed. So they really just kind of beat the living shit out of him and butchered him. And this guy was the last sort of pretender to the imperial throne. I don't even know if Rome had a throne, or if that was like an important. I don't think it was, but the imperial office. So yeah, I don't want to use like Christian, Judeo-Christian language when talking about the pagan Romans. So no throne, but he did have the office of emperor, and now it's Vespasian who has it, because Vespasian is the only strong man really running things. And now you're going to think that Vespasian loses, he gets murdered and then loses, and he doesn't get murdered. He actually is emperor for a decade. And he also has my birthday too, which is sort of neat. He and Tiberius. And what I can say about Vespasian is that he spawns a dynasty of his own. He builds the Colosseum. He's not, 10 years is not that long to be like a king. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess it is and it isn't. These guys in ancient Rome, they lived a lot longer than the medieval Europeans lived, especially in like England or France or whatever. But they also didn't rule that long. Like, they ruled a comparable length of time to the English kings in a lot of cases. So it's weird. Like, he's the emperor of Rome, massive empire at this point, massive, almost spanning the whole Mediterranean, really, and yet he only runs it for 10 years. And his successor is his son Titus, and then after that it's his other son. Who was the other one? Was it Caracalla? Or was it Domitian? I think it's Domitian, yeah. After that's Domitian. And I'll get to them in a second, but I want to say about some things about Vespasian. Obviously, Vespasian is a career general for the most part. He fights in Britain during the invasion. He fights in the Jewish-Roman War. He's sort of around everything, and he spends some time in Egypt, but he's around for the Year of the Four Emperors, and then he is emperor himself. Okay, so let's go back to the tier list. Now I'll look at his death really quickly just for context. I think he got like a food poisoning. He had a sudden diarrhea, and he all but swooned, and he said an emperor ought to die standing, and while he was struggling to get on his feet, he died in the arms of those who tried to help him. At the age of 69 years, 7 months
7 days, almost 70. So that's pretty old. It's older than my dad, I think, or almost like something like that. And his I think it's funny. His main accomplishment was restabilizing the empire. Obviously, he was the only effective emperor in a long time. But I think what he's probably best known for is the iconic Colosseum, which is called the Flavian Amphitheater technically. But he began the construction of the Colosseum, and Titus would finish it. His son Titus. He also had some funny moments in his life when he was an emperor. Like he was running for office, and on some level, and one of his opponent was like a homosexual, and who took it in the butt, and that was like in an ancient Rome, like you could be gay, but if you took it in the butt, you were like double gay, and so so they had like a real stigma against it, and so he said he would slander his opponent, like his opponent would criticize him for this or that, like calling Vespasian a brute or something, and Vespasian would be like, well, at least I'm a man, and he was indicating that this guy took it in the ass, and that's the kind of thing that ancient Rome people didn't like, was taken in the butthole. So Vespasian kind of had a brutish sort of sense of humor, and he was a real military dude, like tried and true. The only thing is that he doesn't seem particularly involved with any conquests in his own reign, and that is why I'm going to give Vespasian an average ranking as an emperor. Only 10 years, and he doesn't really make any significant conquests. But he does stabilize, but that's a lot of people could kind of do that, or at least you would think so. So Vespasian gets where's Galba and all of them? Oh, here they are. Okay, yeah, these guys were all okay. This is Galba. I would say Galba was average. Oh, I need to close this. I would say Galba was average. He was just really old, so he was a victim of circumstance, and he was betrayed by his own supporters, more or less. He just wasn't. He didn't have the energy to deal with all the power politics and cloak and dagger stuff. If this is Otho, I think Otho was bad. I think Otho was young enough that he could have stabilized the empire, but he just had a weak character. He was kind of a cupcake. Where's Vitellius? This is Vitellius. Vitellius was also bad. Vitellius, while he could win against Otho, he couldn't really win against anyone else, and he was sort of a tool, sort of a degenerate, a wastrel. And I think his death was actually more embarrassing than Otho's death. Otho had more dignity than Vitellius, but Otho was just lackluster, and Vitellius was just gross. Still, in order to be great, you have to understand the psychology of the weak, of the meek. So these guys are worthy of study just as well as the better ones. Claudius is good. Yeah, Claudius can be good because he conquered Britain. It's pretty amazing. By the way, just as a caveat, mTOR, you're going to go into these videos wanting to understand how the Roman Empire expands. And the weird thing is that by the time it's established, it's actually kind of already at its zenith. Like, yeah, like under Trajan, it does expand into like Arabia, and it reaches its height of territorial width and height, or whatever. With height, it reaches its width and height of of territory, territorial mass. I don't know how to explain. It's as big as it's going to get under Trajan, and then it sort of dwindles after that, slowly but surely. And but Trajan, I don't even know if we're going to get the Trajan. I guess we might get the Trajan. An hour. Okay, up next is Titus. See, that's another guy. I don't know what his face looks like. And I will say about Titus that he did not last very long. Lasted 2 years. But for whatever reason, in those 2 years that he ruled were incredibly efficient, and he's kind of regarded as a really important emperor, but just kind of like Galba, he was a victim of circumstance, and he died soon after he was risen to power. Where is this? Is this him? Oh, I think this is Vespasian, by the way. So Titus. Yeah, I think this is Titus. So Vespasian, I give Vespasian an average, and then let me remind myself what his exact accomplishments were I mean, not Vespasian, Titus. He finished the Jewish wars. Oh, that's so interesting. I actually didn't even piece that together, but it makes total sense. The Colosseum was like a monument for victory in the Jewish wars, which was a war. It was like it was a revolt, really. It was a rebellion by the Jews against the Roman Empire, the hegemony, and they lost. The temple was destroyed again, or something like I guess the temple was already destroyed, but they destroyed all the fortresses that the Jews were using, and the Colosseum was like being made this whole time, and it came to sort of unofficially, sort of / officially signify the victory over the Jewish revolt, because it was an important revolt. It had to be. It was a major part of the eastern territories, provinces, right? So kind of interesting. I don't know how to verify any of that. That sounds like something you would have to really look into to verify. Let me see what their sources. Rome, Oxford Archaeological Guide. Commemorate the military achievements of the Flavians and the Jewish. Yeah, I just don't. I don't really believe that. I mean, yeah, it's important. Okay, here it is. The source. Yeah, see, this source doesn't even verify. I'm not seeing anything about the Jewish revolt. So the source they use is like is total fucking hokum. And you're actually learning stuff about Colosseum, but has nothing to do with the Jewish revolt. So that tells you, just don't use Wikipedia. Just don't do it. It's so bad. And honestly, the stuff you learn on there, it's all like dark web sort of incel sort of red pill shit, probably. Like it just sort of veers that way organically. I would just not use Wikipedia. I'm only doing it to find the busts and the chronology stuff. Obviously, if you read something from Suetonius, that's going to be copied and pasted from a Suetonius translation. But when they say these interpretations, like, well, they made it to commemorate killing all the Jews or whatever the fuck they said, and then what they bring you to, you can't even really look at the book, and the part you can look at doesn't say anything about it. So Wikipedia, it's got some problems. It's yeah. And the fucked up part is a lot of people have gotten a lot smarter because of Wikipedia, but they've also gotten more delusional. So it's a double-edged sword. So Vespasian, where is he? Yeah, average. I mean, I could put Vespasian in good because he stabilized the empire. Titus, I think Titus was I would say Vespasian was good. No, I don't want to. I want to say it's average. I think Titus and him are average. Now, where's Domitian? This is Domitian. Domitian, yeah. Let me see what. Yeah, Domitian was the kind of guy that He had some war. What was the war? Wow, they're really into it. How long did he reign? Oh, he reigned. He ran the empire for 15 years or so. So that's longer than the last several by far. I mean, it's longer than all of them, and yeah, it's just longer than a lot of them. Um, and then I think his successor was well, and then he tried to conquer northern Britain, the Dacian Wars. So a lot of people didn't like him, and he was assassinated by court officials. Suetonius. So Domitian styled himself as like a proper Roman emperor, and there is a lot of interesting literary feats going on during his reign because it's a relatively stable reign. And it's in a sort of a unique time where he's fighting wars that don't really are kind of low stakes, but they do sort of ramp up the height of the grandeur of the Roman Empire. I'm not even convinced that he was that effective at leading these conflicts, but I think that there is a strong possibility that he was Tacitus. See, Agricola was going to try to conquer Scotland, and Domitian was the emperor. But I think Domitian made it recalled Agricola. That's right. That's the classic sort of tragedy of it. And he recalled Agricola, and so Agricola couldn't conquer Scotland, even though he was kind of getting close to doing it. And Domitian just kind of had a vanity where he wanted to do these projects, but then he couldn't really finish a lot of them. That's at least how his character is starting to look like. And he had an execution like sort of anxiety, it seems like. So I would say he's slightly bad. What you could do is you could probably call him average, and you could probably boost. Oh, is this boost? I don't think he's worse than Tiberius, you know. So you could probably boost Vespasian and Titus. Yeah, I'll do that. Domitian, I mean, you know, a lot of people probably didn't mind Domitian's reign. It's probably anyway. So who's next? After Domitian, obviously he's executed by the fucking government. You know, it's like he's not his personal guard. He's not conspired against by his friends. It's not a personal thing. The court kills Domitian because he focused too much on his popularity with the army, but he was seen as a tyrant. Which probably means that he spent his money, he spent the coffers, you know, of Rome on the army too much, draining the civil side of the empire. Now his successor was Nerva. Oh yeah, Nerva's another one kind of like Galba. He was hardly an emperor. 2 years, very old, 66, almost the age of Galba. Who succeeded him? The good news about Nerva is he was transitional. He wasn't marking like a sort of decline so much. He actually was marked a period of upgrade. Unlike Galba, where Galba marked a downgrade, Nerva marked an upgrade. And Nerva was successor, was one of the best emperors Rome has ever produced, Trajan, who we'll get to. So Nerva, by dint of his sort of the luck that he had with his successor, I'd say he's better than Galba. And he selected Trajan as an heir, so it was his own intention to make Trajan rule, which says even more to his character. So Nerva underrated. And he died of natural causes too. So I would say Nerva is good, a good emperor. Where's the bust? That's Nerva. This is going to be difficult. Okay, I think this is Augustus. So put Augustus, great. Yeah, I think that's Augustus. Okay, or no, that's Marcus Aurelius, isn't it? That's Marcus Aurelius. No, that's no. Okay, that's Augustus. I think that's Augustus. Anyway, going back. Nerva is kind of like what you would like a normal person today would be like if they were the emperor. It's like as good as they could do. You know, couple years, nothing fell apart. He dies natural causes. He finds someone better than himself to succeed him. He's kind of like he's like a very Christian seeming kind of guy. Humble. But I can't figure out what he looks like. What is this? He did some funny thing where he taxed the Jews, I guess. But he also granted allotments of land to the poor people. That's kind of an intriguing sort of like Nazi kind of element to what he did. But again, not very short-lived emperor. He obviously didn't kill the Jews or something, but he seemed to tax them and give them money. If I'm reading that right, he taxed the Jews and gave them money, redistributed all their money to the poor, or did something gerrymanderish to affect that impression. Oh no. Okay, he abolished the Jewish tax. So overall, he did a lot of nice things financially for everyone. Okay. All right. Well, let's hope that's true. He seems like a really nice dude. I'm gonna give him great. I think everything this guy did, if I can just find his bust, was solid. He's considered the first of the 5 good emperors by Gibbon, the Nerva Antonine dynasty. Okay. Where is this? Is this guy? Okay, maybe I already found him somewhere. Maybe he was the old man. Yeah, he might have been this old man. Fuck. It's so hard to figure out. Okay, let me look up Nerva because these busts are not easy. I don't think they're easy because they're okay. He looks like that. I think he's this guy. Yeah, okay. Nerva, I think is pretty great. There's not a bad thing I could say about him except for the fact that he died pretty early into the reign, which would destabilize. But his successor was like one of the best emperors ever, Trajan. And it's like that was the territorial height of the Roman Empire was under Trajan. And okay, see this is Trajan here. Okay, Trajan looks like a fucking tonsured monk in a monastery in like Switzerland. He doesn't look like an emperor, which is kind of strange since he is considered one of the best. So maybe these guys are trying to like look more and more like Christian sort of celibate types. I don't know. It's funny. Domitian was just like assassinated, but Domitian, I will say, Domitian was like an old school style and a styled emperor. It's just that the people were fed up with that kind of like Augustus sort of ego-driven style of rule, and so they murdered him. But Domitian, kind of in a way, was kind of doing everything that a lot of people expected him to do. So it tells you that the world had changed. Okay, let's look at Trajan. He was Spanish. Kind of interesting, from Sevilla. It's kind of wild. No, his family wasn't. I can't. I think he was a Spanish, or like Iberian, guy. As much as one could be back then. He's like the edge of the Roman Empire, military career. So he also granted the plebes money gifts, and the troops. He disempowered the troops, which is interesting because he seems like he understood the military very well, but he's also sort of giving them less bonuses. This kind of thing that Domitian would have given them, he's taking away. And he seems like he really was a favor of sort of educational bureaucracy. He had a lot of it was very complicated sort of restructuring he was doing, more complicated than the other stuff we've seen. He invested in a lot of stuff. They even made him a pharaonic. They made him look like a pharaoh in Egypt. He was that sensational. And then, is this Tacitus? Who's this? I don't know. This is a secondary. He had some kind of thing with Greece, which is, you're going to see this more with Hadrian. He's trying to, increase the Grecian influence on the Roman civic society, and it's for good reason, which is that the Greeks, in a time of peace and prosperity, the Greek culture probably has more favorability than the Roman culture, the endemic Roman culture would. If you're thinking of the cosmopolitan nuances of the Roman Empire at this point, they're going to look more at Greece with nostalgia than they are at Rome, because they just see that as the overlord. So by promoting Greek culture, he's kind of promoting cosmopolitanism within the empire. It's actually pretty shrewd. I'd probably do the same thing, honestly. Built, yeah. You can say a lot about Trajan. It's obviously, there's a famous column still stands in Rome, and he conquered. Okay, he was able to conquer Dacia. I guess Domitian failed to do that, because he was not, like, he was like, he couldn't get anything completed, and Trajan could. So Trajan outshines Domitian again. Parthian campaign, how did that go? Wow, the surviving accounts of Trajan's Parthian war are fragmentary and scattered, according to R.P. Longden. That's a very interesting snapshot in time, a wrinkle in time, let's say, because Parthia was Persia, and they were never conquered by the Romans, and you have to wonder why. And Trajan seems like he was best set up to conquer Parthia basically over anyone I can think of. I mean, maybe Augustus, but like Trajan at this point, 100 years after Augustus, he was just as set up as anyone has been. He wouldn't let them settle, but he went to war. Okay, let me look at the outcome, course of the war. Okay, this is pretty documented. It's just there's not that many sources on it. Interestingly, his health started to fail him while at war against Parthia and probably Syria. Um, but that war was diverted by a rebellion by the Jews, and then he grew ill. But I think what we're noticing about Trajan is that he went as far as anyone could go, and it ultimately ended with him not being able to conquer Persia. And for whatever reason, the Jews seemed like they divested his invasion force and made him have to put valuable military resources or assets into squashing the rebellion. So Trajan, I give him a great. I think Trajan's great. A little boring and sort of staid and secondary and predictable and kind of just this sort of rugged military, bureaucrat. But it just everything he did, he was rational enough and fortune favored him. Okay. After him, we have Hadrian, who is one of these. How's Hadrian look? Hadrian probably also can get S tier. He wasn't as militarily oriented as Trajan, but he did promote a lot of construction, and he promoted Greek-Roman relations. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, so he's obviously paying attention to that too. A very effective ruler. He built libraries in Athens. He did all sorts of stuff. He was more of a patron of the arts than Trajan was. Actually, was Antoninus pious? No, he was next. Doesn't seem like he was going to a lot of wars. Which, there's a third Roman-Jewish war, the Bar Kokhba revolt. Man, there was a lot of rebellions with the Jews. Just saying. If you look at Wikipedia, it's like one of the main things every emperor has to deal with is Jewish revolt, A, B, or C. And the mausoleum of Hadrian became like a fortress in the Renaissance, but it's still there. You can still go to it. Hadrian's an S tier, but he's kind of a soft S. He kind of let conflict come to him. He didn't seek conquest, and he sort of fortified his interior world really well, but he wasn't an externally oriented person the way Trajan was. He was sort of an inside-out version of Trajan, still incredibly effective and amazing emperor. They do say that he was he's the homosexual emperor, by the way. So there is some sort of idea that maybe Trajan was more, military focused because he wasn't homosexual, and Hadrian was a little bit more into artistic stuff. I think that's probably operative. But at the same time, Hadrian is one of the best emperors ever. Let me find what his bust looks like. Okay. Is this it? Okay, I can't go off this one. He has a beard. Also, the beard that he's using. This is the first one to use a beard. That's because the Greeks. He was such a diplomat with the Greeks. He really promoted their identity within the context of the Roman Empire, which I don't know if that was good. He might have watered down Rome as the center of political control, as a cultural powerhouse. Might have watered down its influence for everyone else. So I think there could be a criticism there that's totally valid and probably underappreciated. But he did do a beard because he thought that was more in keeping with the Greek style, the philosopher style, because he wanted to be like a philosopher king. And obviously, Marcus Aurelius really tried to be a philosopher king, or at least he wrote his confessions in that tone. And then Hadrian also was trying to do that. But I don't think he wrote. You know, he wasn't. It's weird. We don't know what he wrote. I mean, he didn't. We don't know if he wrote confession style diary, because Marcus Aurelius's confessions were just the meditations. I mean, not the confessions. Augustine. That's Augustine, but Marcus Aurelius wrote the meditations, and that was seen as like a diary that he didn't want to publish. So we don't know. Maybe Hadrian did the same kind of thing. A lot of emperors probably kept diaries that we just don't know anything about. Okay, here's another. Maybe I can find his face. I'm gonna go with this one. I don't really believe it, but I'm just gonna go with it. Okay, put him in great. Hadrian, great. And up next is Antoninus Pius. Now I know from experience that Antoninus Pius is not as documented as Trajan or Hadrian. Oh, weird. I thought this was so that the guy I put as Augustus, Antoninus Pius. Weird. Funny. Okay. Emperor. Yeah, they're saying there's a lack of warfare. This is not a great sign for ostensibly a military-based empire, you know. But and he's gonna after him. There's gonna be a kind of a well, you're gonna have Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, so that's pretty good. He did a diplomatic mission to China, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. Yeah, I think this guy was kind of just towing the line a little. He was kind of like he found himself in a good situation, and he just minimized how much, you know, projects he had to do. And it was really effective for Rome, but as an emperor, it's a little embarrassing. So I'll give him good, not great, just because I don't see him focusing on a lot. It doesn't focus on a particular theme in my view. I'm sure I'll come around to having a different attitude. The other thing is that there's less we know about Antoninus Pius, but that could be for a legitimate reason. Maybe there's just less to say. You know, he might have been a more private emperor. So where's the Augustus? Oh, here it is. I'll put him in good. Okay, up next we have Marcus Aurelius, Lucius Verus. These emperors don't get assassinated. These are called the five good emperors. So, he was really financially smart too. He left a lot of money in the surplus. And he expanded free access to drinking water throughout the empire and encouraging legal. He was kind of just like sort of a funny sort of benefactor for the people. It's like a little awkward, but decent. And up next is Marcus Aurelius, probably the most famous Roman emperor. He was in that movie Gladiator. He's the only emperor who's really written a book that's ever been publicized. It's one of the most popular books in Western literary canon, the Meditations. And he reigned for quite some time. He actually had a co-emperor, Lucius Verus. But Lucius Verus died. And look at this guy's hair. It's so weird. So weird. Yeah, and even when he was young, he had the same sort of neck beard, kind of bushy haired look. And I don't know why what is up with this guy? And the funny thing is, he's the most recognizable guy because of the fucking neck beard. But then he's not even on the list because he was co-emperor with Marcus Aurelius, who is great. I'll just say he was a great emperor. But Lucius Verus isn't the other here. Whatever. Lucius Verus deserves more. He deserves to be at least placed on this list. But he isn't. But he did die early, and he was sort of just towing the line like Antoninus Pius in a way, kind of a mild guy, kind of. So the real person you want to focus on is Marcus Aurelius, I would think. And there's a lot to say about him. We won't go through it all. Antoninus Pius, I think, had the longest reign since Augustus. So that's another contribution to the empire that he molded for himself. Accession of Marcus Aurelius. Finally, he has a war with Parthia. Now, how does that go? And Antoninus Pius did not like the Parthians, and he even said something about it on his deathbed, if you believe Wikipedia's sources. So then Marcus Aurelius goes against Parthia. Let me guess, it doesn't work. We all know the story here. It won't work. Parthia never loses to the Romans. It's the inconquerable foe. Alexander could handle it, but no Roman could. Yeah, well, you know what it was is Lucius Verus handled it, and Lucius Verus sacked the city that was still a Greek city, and they opened the city to Lucius Verus, and he just sacked it, even though they were kind of expressing loyalty to him. So that stained the war effort, and then and then they were kind of retreated back with their renewed supplies to Roman territory. Oh, so I guess they did sort of this guy Cassius was pretty involved also, and they went pretty far out. They captured our parts of Armenia. They basically went there and captured some random sort of areas, and then they came back and like, yeah, we conquered Parthia. But from what I can tell, they didn't conquer Parthia. They just sort of conquered the marginal regions. Kind of like what Russia's doing to Ukraine right now. And okay. I'm kind of losing steam. Then there's War of Germanic Tribes. This is a little more famous. I think Vienna, like the city of Vienna under Marcus Aurelius, Lucius Verus. I don't know if Lucius Verus dies at this point, but Marcus Aurelius goes out to fight the Macromani, and I think he's doing it to sort of one up Lucius Verus, and because Lucius Verus did the Parthian invasion, and so he's going out to these Germanic tribes and more or less cuts down opposition from the Eastern Macromani, and I believe sets up a base in where it is now modern day Vienna. So that's the first kind of origin point for the Eastern Germanic civilization. Obviously, you have Trier was a big city back in Roman times for German people, but Vienna was so far east that it's fascinating that it was sort of had an origin at this point. And there's some trade with Han China, a plague, and then he dies at 58. And he did die in Vienna, yeah, because he was fighting there. He was on what do they call it? I mean, on campaign in Vienna, outside by Vienna. So he died in Vienna, which is kind of a nice place to die. Kind of funny that he would even go there, but that's where he went. And his biological son, not his adopted son, his biological son Commodus, doesn't get affected by the plague and outlives his father, who does die from plague. And this is kind of the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire, because after Commodus, after Marcus Aurelius, there really isn't a great emperor series. I mean, you'll get the occasional great emperor like Diocletian or Constantine, and there's a few others that are also pretty good, but you're not going to get like a 50-year period of like 5 emperors that are just like all killer, and like and all these guys are sort of bulwarks against the downfall, but they're not really revitalizing the empire. They're sort of just sustaining its decay, or delaying. I mean, delaying the decay. So the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire is in year 180, when Marcus Aurelius dies in Vienna. I guess they called it Vindobona back then. And then Commodus takes over, and Commodus is like a Twitch streamer level dipshit. Commodus is actually the most hilarious Roman emperor ever. By the way, here's Commodus. Commodus basically starts out doing all the typical things that an emperor would do, and all is well and good. This is like Caligula and Nero. But the part where it gets pretty funny is that he starts going to the Colosseum for like the big fights, and he decides it would be a great publicity stunt for his image as the governor of all the Romans in the Mediterranean Empire, right? It would be great for his image if he fought in the battles in the gladiatorial games himself. And so he would basically do these stunts where he'd have like a bear or a lion roll up, and he would just sort of stab it, and while it was being held down or held back or restrained, right? And then it would die, and then everyone would cheer like, "Oh, the emperor's a savage! Like, go woot woot, go for the emperor!" And he would do that, and everyone loved it. But they loved it because it was a crazy gimmick. They didn't love it because they actually believed that he was, capable of murdering a lion in single combat. Thomas was too dumb to understand that, and so for the rest of his entire reign, he did all this time to pretend to train to be able to fight lions, and yet at the same time, letting lions get killed by having his whole body part swarms, fully constrained lion. And he'll do this in different ways, left and right. I think he does he thinks in battle. One of the battle things, particular to Thomas, but he would have these mock battles, which he always win. And it just feels hated. We're just discussing it. He presents him as a range idiot. And it's sort of this moment where, yeah, when he's a guy, his work is larping as a Hercules type guy. As I said, my God, he's larping. In his spectacular fashion. And basically just about himself. It's also like the video games. Really, really impressive for the Roman public. And eventually he's just basically trying to death by his personal trainer. It's just a shame of him saying as emperor. He did much for everyone around. And Thomas says this is decisive downfall. And they probably see emperor for over almost 15 years. Maybe people saw his just like full. Nice tyrants. That's much more than fool. I wonder if there's much information about him. That movie Gladiator didn't about the crazy asshole psychopath. But I'm not sure if he's not a psychopath. Maybe he's just, kind of autistic. Clay. Okay, there's information about some of the people in this world. And they become when he had a lot of iconography dedicated to himself. Of course he would. He was an emperor, right? I had to. Some of this is stats, but it's just structured mentioning ancient context. Some revolts in Brittany brings by problems. Okay. He actually deals with it firsthand. So reliable source. Because when we are stories for we about a lot of people never see you guys witnessing so you know it's more or less true. We have certainty. Because yeah, he was about saying his Bible and he was a slave of his companions. Ignorance, I think of ignorance, and he's living philosophical habits, which is nature. So that's he was trying to defend his cancer. Was really inside. It was inside. Yeah, so I was lost in there. I don't know what you are. I don't think they're important. Commodus gets terrible. Let me see if they're even. Who's next? Pertinax. Yeah, we don't need to go into Pertinax. Pertinax is another guy who was only a year emperor for 3 months, and then after him is Didius Julianus, who very obscure character. He was also emperor for less than a year. And then you get Septimius Severus, and Septimius Severus is pretty good, but then you get Caracalla, who's kind of fucked up. Geta, who's kind of fucked up. And they rule as co-emperors. After them, you get Macrinus, who ruled for over a year, I guess, something like. Then Elagabalus, who's really not good. And then you get Severus Alexander, who, like I was saying, the beginning of the end was at the end of Marcus Aurelius. Severus Alexander is an example. By the way, his name was Marcus Aurelius Severus Alexander. So funny nod back to Marcus Aurelius. Clearly had his name sake. Marcus Aurelius Severus Alexander. It was like 50 years after Marcus Aurelius died that he ruled. I guess 42 years after he died, and he was kind of like the last capable emperor. He was assassinated. And then after that, you get what's called the crisis of the 3rd century. And that is kind of the end of like the golden age of the Principate. The crisis of the 3rd century is the end of the traditionally understood Roman Empire. It reformulates, but it's never the same. Marcus Aurelius was the last great emperor, and Marcus Aurelius Severus Alexander. So Marcus Aurelius is the last great emperor, and Severus Alexander, we don't have his bust, but he was the last good emperor of the traditional Roman Empire, in my estimation. Now, obviously, there's a guy right before this called, what'd you call him? Septimius Severus. He was kind of in between. He was also, in between Marcus Aurelius and in between Severus Alexander. Septimius Severus was a pretty good emperor. But these guys are getting fewer and far between, right? Like it takes, in between each of these, there's like 2 shitheads, 3 shitheads. It's harder to find capable leaders. And it won't be until this one character named Diocletian that the empire is brought back into sort of the semblance of a super order that can really compose it into a power again, a major power, superpower, right? But this guy abdicates in 305, so even he gets like tired of the fucking game he has to play. But he does effectively save the Roman Empire, and what he does, just to spare you looking it up, is he divides it into 4 corners. They call it tetrarchy, where it's like northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. He divides it into 4 parts, and he has 2 co-emperors, and then they each have like a sub co-emperor who does another subdivision, who rules another subdivision. And That is the best structure of the Roman Empire for a while. And just from there. And just years from this point on, from about years after the abdication, Christianity takes a whole place, and Christians moved in as migrants. We've had great trust with Romans and faith in sack Rome. Sacked a couple times. I think first like this announcement of Vandals. And that is effectively the end of the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire maintains a homogeneity for about 1,000 years. But we all know the show's over. Everyone's been Christian. And equals God. The only person who indicated paying more returns during apostate, but as the last longest emperor. So overall, it just evolves into a mess. Justinian does restore the Roman Empire to a semblance of its old glory. That is the last restoration of a maneuver that happens. And it's interesting, but it's no longer really true Roman Empire. You see fiction points. And these guys that we all discuss are kind of the bread and butter of Roman history. Now, once the Roman Republic began, or after members and senators and generals, and the Pontifex Maximus, the tribunal debts, and people with sacred sort of roles, religious oriented roles. But the emperors got much of them on stage. That's what we kind of heard. It's actually not a sad story. Related. A great polity that before a lot of important sovereignty war just falls from grace over time. And not really not long of a stretch of time. About, in a way, I think it's about 200 years. About, that's not really. It's 180. It's when it's just worse and worse. No, not getting again. And a lot of people say 415. Or something like one of the events. Second Rome. But it's like the second Rome. I tell you the second Rome, it was already an answer. The buildings are standing. Okay, yeah. Basically the second Rome. It's like forgotten conclusion. Yeah, but they're saying, yeah, exactly, this is important. Rome isn't even a capital empire anymore. We haven't moved to Milan and the 286. I think and we've had for two. But 286 from without actually, getting my second moved. The capital to Milan, or where it was. Anyway, 2 hours. Just to remind you, the worst emperors were Caligula, Commodus, and then also Nero, Vitellius, and Otho. And in average, we have Domitian, Galba, and Tiberius. And then the good ones we have Antoninus Pius, Titus, Vespasian, Claudius. And then the great emperors we have Marcus Aurelius, Hadrian. I don't know if that's really his. That's the one I'm really questioning. I don't know if that's actually his bust. And then you have, of course, Trajan, and my personal favorite, Nerva, who is just it's just a hilarious person to include because he ruled 2 years It was kind of impeccable. And it's like, where do you get that? It's so rare in a very dark discussion like this. Anyway, that's it. 1 hour and 55 minutes. It's close enough to 2. Good night. Good luck. Take care. Toodaloo. Toddy-da. La-di-da. There's a time and a season for everything, I guess. Now, a part 2. I don't know if there's going to be a part 2 for the emperors. What I'll try to do is I'll try to do the Byzantine emperors, the medieval Christian Eastern Roman emperors that were basically just the kingdom of the Greeks. I'll try to do that for part 2. And then maybe if I'm bored or running out of steam on that, I'll do the ones in the late empire. I'll do senators that are important, like famous Roman senators, or I'll do all the emperors I didn't talk about, the ones that really were terrible, and maybe even compile them into like a super list where I go really fast and just sort of take quick shots at every Roman emperor. And there's probably like 80 or so of people that you would mention in that case. So I have to go by really quickly. Interestingly enough, I'm trying to do the Holy Roman Emperors, which is probably going to be easier than this, although less interesting because they were all very, cheesy about their dignity and their chastity and stuff. They're all very, pretentious about Christian nobility and stuff. So they're not going to be as juicy in the gossip. There's not going to be really any gossip about them, but you can rank them with respect to each other. So the Holy Roman Emperors of Germany, or whatever, Bohemia, Switzerland, whatever Italy, whatever the case may be, the Middle Ages, right? And then I was looking at Hungary because they have a lot of funny stories about their kings in Hungary. I was obviously going to do. I did England before, up until the War of the Roses, which takes longer than it sounds. And I was probably going to do the next batch, like the modern monarchs of England. But I would also want to do Spanish rulers, and I want to do French rulers. I would do all of it, really. I think the main ones that are like most pressing, the ones I'd want to do in the next month, let's say, are Holy Roman Emperors, followed by Hungary for whatever reason, because I just think it's so hilarious. Then maybe Byzantine, maybe French, and then beyond that, if I don't want to do those for some reason, I'll probably do Russian, or I'll do like Austrian archdukes, or I'll do popes of just from Rome, the Vatican, or I'll do Spanish, this or that. And of course, I have to do presidents of the United States too. One that would be fun would be prime ministers, tier list of prime ministers of England. That would take more research than I've done, but but I could be snappy about it because there hasn't been that many prime ministers. I don't think they've been being a prime minister. I think it's a little different system than in America. I think you can do it for longer or something. I don't know. I don't know how many prime ministers there have been. I feel like it's not an insane. I feel like it's a pretty interesting list of people, no matter how you slice it. And then, generals would be good. One for just military people. Let's say Napoleonic Wars. Let's say War of the Spanish Succession. Let's say 30 Years' War. Awesome. Heck, Italian Wars, cool. Stuff about conquistadors, stuff about colonial revolutionary figures. Like Simon Bolivar, was like Fidel Castro, someone. That'd be good. A lot of people, sure. And it's this military history. Ordeal. So that's 2 hours. Check it out. That's a lot. Perfect. Actually, a lot. Where do you call it? I'll just tell you. Like the line business. Where do they go? What's this another? So sorry. Maybe this was a part of this type of list. But I think that maybe a list. Stanford research. But it's a list for this. Yeah, it's platform. You can the world's best. Pretty smart research. Yep. Good night, good luck. Further ado.